you. So good morning again. Carol Holmes at RNAO, and I'm the Program Manager for the Long-Term Care Best Practices Program. And joining me at the session today is Heather McConnell. And Heather is the Associate Director of the International Affairs and Best Practice Guidelines Center at RNAO. And together we're going to provide this session on the proposal for the Long-Term Care Best Practice Spotlight Organization. We have an outline for today's presentation, and there are a number of elements, as you'll see on the slide. We'd like to describe the Best Practice Spotlight Organization designation program to you and talk about the process for becoming a long-term care BPSO. We're also going to discuss the eligibility requirements for organizations that are interested in applying for the long-term care BPSO designation. And we'll review pre-designation deliverables that are part of this program, and we'll also describe supports that are provided by RNAO regarding this undertaking. And before we wrap up, there will be opportunity for questions and some discussion should you have questions to ask of us. We're just pausing to try to advance the slide. Thank you. So, at the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario, I'm hoping that you know about us, but I'll just summarize what we're about. We're the professional association for nurses in Ontario, and we're a strong, credible voice leading the nursing profession to influence and promote healthy public policy and clinical excellence. And in terms of clinical excellence, we do this through the International Affairs and Best Practice Spotlight Organization Center, and the Best Practice Guidelines is a signature program of RNAO. So a little bit about the International Affairs and Best Practice Guidelines Center. Our mandate is to develop, disseminate, and actively support the uptake of evidence-based clinical and healthy work environment best practice guidelines, and as part of that, to evaluate their impact in terms of patients or residents and the organizations and the health system outcomes. And we're funded through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and that funding has been in place for this program since 1999. In terms of best practice guidelines and the program that we have in place for that, there are a number of elements that you'll see on this particular slide. It starts with the development of the guidelines. And we engage in a very rigorous process around guideline development that includes a number of components to do a systematic review of research literature, to engage a panel of experts, to move the guideline development process forward, and of course that is all supported through the funds that we have available for this process and staff at RNAO. Once guidelines are developed, we look at deploying or disseminating those to people who are interested in using them, and of course support the implementation of the guidelines. And there are a number of ways in which we do that through best practice spotlight organizations, which we're speaking about today, through our Champions Network, through advanced clinical practice fellowships, through RNAO communities, and through other organizations that we're working with. We move on to evaluate and monitor the use of those guidelines, and today you're going to hear about some of those elements In particular, the NQuire program that we have in place to evaluate and monitor the effectiveness of guideline implementation. And of course, all of this is with a view to enhance the outcomes both for nurses, patients, organizations, and at a broader societal or a system level within healthcare. As I mentioned, our implementation methodology includes strategies at individual level, at organizational levels, and at the system level. And today, we're going to talk about both the system level and the organizational level. So at a system level, the Long-Term Care Best Practices Program is an area that is also funded by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. And this program has been in place under the leadership of RNAO since 2008. And the aim of the program is to enhance the quality of care for residents in long-term care homes by creating a culture of evidence-based practice and encouraging staff in long-term care homes to use our best practice guidelines in their practice. So at the organizational level, we're going to be talking today about the Best Practice Spotlight Organization designation. So organizational implementation, our key strategy around that is through the Best Practice Spotlight organizations, and our goal there is to influence the uptake of best practice guidelines across all healthcare organizations and to enable practice excellence and positive client outcomes. So in the case of talking about the long-term care best practice spotlight organization approach, we're wanting to influence that practice with respect to residents that you're working with in long-term care. So what is the Best Practice Spotlight Organization designation all about? Well, essentially it is this, that we invite organizations to partner with RNAO to implement multiple best practice guidelines over a 3-year period to attain the BPSO designation. And as you're aware, there is an application process through a response to the request for proposals, and those organizations that are successful in this are invited for a formal partnership with RNAO. So there are specific requirements regarding the BPSO designation, and those include systematic implementation of best practices, developing an infrastructure to ensure that that is able to happen in the organization, a reporting approach, approaches to knowledge exchange, sustainability in terms of planning for the successful implementation of guidelines, and measuring the outcomes through the use of standard indicators. And we're going to be talking about all of those things in the presentation this morning. So designated best practice spotlight organizations sustain the use of guidelines, they expand and spread the use of those guidelines, and they're also in a position to offer mentoring to other organizations that are looking to engage in similar types of work. We have numerous best practice spotlight organizations, both within Ontario and beyond. And these are the logos of many of them that are involved in BPSO work currently. So looking at this on an international level, we have best practice spotlight organizations in Canada and in South America, in Europe, in Spain, and in South Africa, and also in Australia. So there are a total of 73 best practice spotlight organizations across the world, and over 330 healthcare and academic sites are involved in those. So BPSO designation is not limited to organizations that provide clinical care. We also engage in a different way with academic organizations to further the use of our guidelines and the work in becoming a best practice spotlight organization. So more specifically, we'll talk about the long-term care best practice spotlight organization designation. And this is an opportunity for long-term care homes to partner with RNAO to create evidence-based cultures and use the guidelines in a systematic approach to implementation of multiple guidelines. And those objectives involve establishing dynamic and long-term partnerships with long-term care homes that focus on an impact on resident care. And that is accomplished through supporting knowledge-based nursing practice. We also demonstrate creative and contextualized strategies for the successful implementation of nursing best practice guidelines at both the individual and organizational levels. And we establish and we use effective approaches to evaluate BPG implementation in long-term care homes, and we use appropriate structure, process, and outcome indicators to do this. And through this work, we identify effective strategies for system-wide dissemination of best practice guidelines and the implementation, and look at outcomes that are particularly targeted to be effective in long-term care. So we currently have 4 organizations that are part of our long-term care BPSO, and these organizations are engaged with us from the current year, 2014, through to 2017. So as you can see on this slide, we have Vision Nursing and Rest Home in Sarnia, Ontario, Parkview Manor Healthcare Centre in Chesley, Ontario, St. Peter's Residence at Shadoke in Hamilton, and then the Region of Peel Long-Term Care, which is a group of 5 long-term care homes, and the Region of Peel is based in the cities of Brampton and Mississauga and the town of Caledon, Ontario. So we have a total of 8 long-term care homes that are currently working with us on their long-term care BPSO designation. So with respect to our current request for proposals, we're looking at the time frame of 2015 to 2018. And these proposals are being issued to identify long-term care homes in those areas of the province where there are currently no long-term care homes engaged in the work that we're doing. So specifically, we're targeting this request for proposals to Waterloo Wellington, Central West, Toronto Central, Central Lynn, the Central East Lynn, Southeast, Champlain, North Simcoe Muskoka, the Northeast, and the Northwest Lynns in the province. Now I'm going to turn things over to Heather to talk about the eligibility criteria, and then she'll move on to talk about the deliverables as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Carol, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you this morning. So I'm going to share with you just the eligibility criteria to apply for the long-term care BPSO call for proposals, and the details of this are found on page 12 of the RFP. So the eligibility criteria have been established based on our experience working with a wide range of organizations that have worked through this process, and certainly these are areas that we have found to be really important for success. So in order to apply and to be eligible to apply, that we're really looking for those organizations that have demonstrated a commitment to evidence-based practice, that they've been involved in guideline implementation already, that they've supported staff to participate in opportunities to build capacity in evidence-based practice. That might have been participation in our Champions Network, may have had advanced clinical practice fellows, could have been attendance at RNAO Learning Institutes or other sector-specific quality improvement or other evidence-based practice capacity building initiatives, so that there's been some commitment to supporting staff in building that knowledge and skills. We're also looking for organizations that have a senior nurse leader in the role of administrator, director of care, or equivalent within your own organizational structure, who's a member of the senior management team. Again, it's really important to have that senior nurse leader voice at that senior table to be able to bring forward issues related to the BPSO activities. It's also, we found, to be tremendously important to have support from all levels of the organization, that everybody's aware of what's going on with BPSO and that they're committed to this process. So that includes support from the board, if that's appropriate for your organizational structure or that senior reporting structure, the senior management team, and all of those individuals that are listed here. In particular, the clinical staff. The clinical staff that are going to be changing practice and working with the residents in your homes, and so it's really important that they're aware of and supportive of this focus on the BPSO and the implementation of evidence-based practice guidelines. And this next eligibility criteria is really focusing on having ways of leveraging the work of the BPSO, the long-term care BPSO, and its focus on evidence-based practice and resident safety with the organization's vision and mission. So I would challenge that probably all of you on the phone have organizations that have reference to quality care, resident safety, those types of things within your vision and mission. And again, that's a great way to leverage and actually see that come alive through the implementation of best practice guidelines as a best practice spotlight organization. We're also looking for organizations that have capacity to implement, monitor, evaluate nursing best practice guidelines using NQuire. And I'm going to speak about that a little bit more later on in the presentation, but that's a critical component of all of this. And certainly long-term care is actually in a very nice position because of the work that you're already doing with RIMDS and other indicators that you're collecting are actually in a very good position to be able to meet this actual eligibility criteria. And we're also looking for those long-term care homes that have the capacity to allocate a BPSO liaison to this work. So this is going to be the individual who will meet and work directly with the RNAO long-term care BPSO coach who will support guideline implementation, evaluation, and sustainability. So having one key person in your organization who is coordinating all these activities and able to work with all members of the team at your organization to support implementation, evaluation, and sustainability. We're also looking for organizations that have been able to work in partnership with others in the past. You'll be working in partnership with RNAO if you're the successful applicant, and you'll also be working with other long-term care homes and other BPSOs from across a variety of sectors as part of this work. And so we want to make sure that you have the ability and the supports in place to be able to make that happen. And again, the whole focus on what happens after this 3 years and being able to demonstrate that you have the supports and the commitment in place to be able to support ongoing implementation, evaluation, and sustainability of this work after this 3-year pre-designation period is complete. So those are the eligibility criteria, and as I said previously, it's those criteria or those sort of strengths and systems in place within organizations that we've found to be really important for organizations to be successful in this work. So now I'm going to turn to the deliverables, and these are basically the activities that the long-term care BPSOs will be committing to doing through this RFP over the next 3 years. And they basically fall in the categories of implementation, capacity building, evaluation and research, and dissemination. So I'll speak predominantly to the implementation and evaluation, and I'll mention dissemination towards the end. So the requirement is that the long-term care BPSOs will engage in a 3-year partnership with RNAO, and I do need to say that this partnership is renewed on an annual basis, so that at the end of each fiscal year, we'll review the progress towards completing the deliverables and renew that contract or the relationship between the RNAO and the long-term care BPSO organization to be able to continue this work together. And it's expected, of course, too, that the long-term care BPSO organization will contribute the necessary financial resources to support guideline implementation, evaluation, and sustainability as part of this work. And we'll talk a little bit more about what resources and funds RNAO will be able to provide to support you in that work. Now, this is a very tiny list, but it's clearly laid out in the RFP. And basically what this is trying to describe here is that the requirement is that you need to implement and or expand the implementation of a minimum of 3 RNAO clinical guidelines. And there is a list that's provided in the RFP for you to select from. And the reason that we've selected these particular guidelines is obviously that they're related to the care of older persons, but it's also equally important that you be aware that these are the guidelines for which we have indicators in our Enquire database. And so when you're selecting from these, selecting your 3 guidelines from this list, you'll also know that based on that selection, there'll be monitoring indicators that will be available for your use. And the full list is available on page 8 and 9. 8 and 9, I think. I've got to put my glasses on. Yes, page 6, actually, of the RFP document. Now, we have had organizations that have implemented more than 3 guidelines, and that's absolutely up to you based on what you've identified as the needs within your own long-term care home. But the requirement is a minimum of 3, one of which needs to be implemented across the entire organization. While the others may be implemented within specific programs or units. And again, it's up to you as you're thinking about where your gaps in services are, where your particular needs are within your long-term care home, feedback from staff, et cetera, to determine not only the selection of the guidelines, but also which units or areas you'd like to implement them in. There is a requirement that all of the guidelines need to be implemented by the end of the 2nd year so that you have 2 full years to implement, and then year 3 really becomes an area of focus on trying to consolidate that work, really focusing on evaluation and sustainability. Now, if you're in a situation where you're a long-term care home with multiple sites, you have a couple of options that you might want to consider. You may select one site to initiate your long-term care BPSO work and plan to spread to the other sites within your collection once you are a BPSO designate. So after the 3-year period, you may wish to do that. Or you may implement across the entire organization at all sites. And if you choose that later choice, the guideline to be implemented across a long-term care home must be implemented at all sites. So if you're a collection of 5 long-term care homes, for example, such as Peel Region is that Carol mentioned earlier, they'll be implementing guidelines in one specific home, but the one that they've chosen to implement across their organization is across all 5 sites. So there's some selection choice there for you to think about. Now, this whole area that I'm going to speak to now under implementation also really directs a focus on capacity building of staff in your long-term care homes to help support them lead and continue this work. So we are looking at the opportunity to engage a critical mass of at least 15% of caregiving and management staff in a combination of roles as RNAO best practice champions. And that's really to be conducted over the span of a 3-year partnership. So it's not something that has to be done right away, but it is something that we found to be very, very important that there be a cohort of individuals within an organization who has an understanding of evidence-based practice and the process for guideline implementation. And so 15% based on the literature seems to be that cohort number that is required to have a critical mass. We're also identifying that it's a requirement to send a minimum of 1 registered nurse or registered practitioner to the Clinical Summer Institute each year of the partnership, and this will be funded by the RNAO with the support from the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. So we'll be able to fund the registration for that individual, but the applicant long-term care BPSO will need to release the staff for that period of time to attend. And again, we've been told over and over again by our BPSOs that attendance at the Summer Institute has been a critical factor in them understanding the process for guideline implementation and really helps developing the plans that they need to put in place to support them in their work long term. Also a requirement under capacity building is the submission of one proposal over the span of the 3-year pre-designation period to the Advanced Clinical Practice Fellowship Program. Now, this is for registered nurses. It is funded by the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, so there are funds available to support this work. $13,000 from the Ministry of Health is contributed to each successful proposal. And basically, the focus here is to have a staff member, if they're successful with their submission, and you'll note that the requirement is to submit, not to be successful. So obviously, we'd hope you'd be successful, but in some instances, that's not the case. But we really do have found that this particular approach and this particular opportunity has been incredibly successful for organizations when they can have staff really focus on a particular area of practice, of leadership, guideline implementation that will help support them move their BPSO work forward. We're also asking that organizations maintain a database or a listing of internal staff who have been engaged in a variety of different activities. And for some of you, that may be very easy depending on your size, but we have found for some larger organizations it's hard for them to keep track of who's been a champion, who's attended institutes, et cetera. So we're making this a requirement now so that you can find a way to be able to track those people and make sure that they have opportunities to connect together during the course of their work. On an annual basis, we have an annual knowledge exchange where all of our BPSOs come together. And this past year, we had over 150 people in attendance at that, and it's seen as a wonderful opportunity for those that are working towards designation and those that have been designated as BPSOs for many years to come together and exchange ideas and strategies for guideline implementation, evaluation, and sustainability. So we would expect that you'd be participating in that. And of course, when we launch our activities with our new cohort of long-term care BPSOs, we'll be having an orientation session to provide a background to the initiative. Now, this whole issue around infrastructure is important, and this has got to do with having a place for accountability for BPSO to lie within the long-term care home. And how you go about doing that is really up to you, but we're really recommending that there be some way that this infrastructure steering committee, whatever you want to call it, has accountabilities related to reporting that will help guide the work of the long-term care BPSO liaison and your implementation teams so that they know who they need to report to, that there's ongoing monitoring towards the success of the deliverables, and that the organization leadership is aware of the progress that's being made. So we found that to be very, very important. And the more that that's integrated with your existing infrastructure, the better it is for long-term sustainability. We're also, as part of this implementation work, asking the homes to commit to working with their LHIN-based RNAO long-term care best practice coordinator, who will be the dedicated RNAO coach that will be working with the long-term care homes throughout the 3-year pre-designation period. And in this role, they'll provide support through a consultant model, but they will not be a working member of the long-term care BPSO implementation teams. And so it will be up to the long-term care home and the coach to determine how they will want to work together to gain knowledge and skill through their expertise. And again, I've spoken to this already about the requirement, but really, again, we're really looking for a regulated nursing staff member to coordinate the implementation and evaluation activities and be that key contact person to liaise with the RNAO long-term care BPSO coach. And of course, this would be the person that might be attending the Knowledge Exchange Symposium that I mentioned earlier. Maybe it would be the person that you send to the Summer Institute, for example, to help have that capacity being built within your long-term care home. We also have opportunities for new BPSOs to work with designated BPSOs in a mentee-mentor relationship. And again, we found that this has been very helpful for some organizations where they have opportunities to really talk with those that have gone before them, help get an understanding of some of the processes, some of the strategies that they utilized that were successful, and get some real feedback on the approaches that they're taking. So you have not only the opportunity to work directly with a coach that's an RNAO staff member, but also a mentee organization that will identify to help support you in the work that you're doing. And as part of implementation, we need to think about sustainability and what's going to happen in the long term. So as part of this initial work, really starting to reflect on what is our sustainability plan after the 3 years is over, how are we going to keep this moving ahead? And some of the strategies that you'll be utilizing during implementation will ultimately help to support that ongoing work in the future. So I'm going to speak now about evaluation and research. And as part of the long-term care BPSO and the BPSO program overall, there is an expectation and requirement that BPSOs will participate in evaluation through our database, which we call NQUIRE, Nursing Quality Indicators for Reporting and Evaluation. And the vision of NQUIRE is that we'll be looking at improved quality health care through the use of nurse-sensitive indicators that are based on the implementation of the RNAO best practice guidelines. And these are expected to impact practice and management decision-making. So when we look at the database of quality indicators, which is a key feature of NQUIRE, the indicators come directly from the practice recommendations that are within the guidelines. So that very long list of guidelines I showed you earlier that we're asking you to select from, each one of those guidelines has a range of indicators that organizations can select from to help evaluate their work. And those indicators reflect structure, process, and outcomes of care arising from guideline implementation. And at this point, only our BPSOs are able to contribute to NQUIRE. There's also opportunities for the collection, analysis, and reporting of comparative indicator data. So some of our organizations have chosen to have their data compared with others so that they can see how they're doing against other organizations of a similar type. And again, really the whole purpose of this is to help us evaluate the outcomes of guideline implementation in BPSOs. We need to know that all of this work we're doing together in relation to developing and implementing guidelines is making a difference to the clients, the patients, the communities, and the residents that we care for. Sorry about that. And this is just a model that kind of describes the process. That the structure indicators are sort of consistent for all of the guidelines, and then within each of the clinical BPGs that you may identify for implementation, there are process indicators and outcome indicators that really lead to us understanding about the client or resident outcome. Now, as part of this work, we'll provide to all of our BPSOs data collection requirements and data collection tools to support this work. And it's really important that you know that the data collected will not include any individual resident identifiers, and that it's aggregated to determine the impact of clinical guidance on resident outcomes in nursing practice. So when the data is submitted, it is not identified by client, and it's your data that you're submitting, and it's up to you to determine whether you want to share that data with other organizations, but it's within the system so that you can run reports and understand the progress that you're making. So I think I've talked about most of this. We do have the opportunity for you to run reports on the data that you've contributed to NQUIRE. There's also often opportunities to participate in research projects. Not always. Research projects come our way, but very often we get requested or see opportunities to do evaluation and research related to specific guidelines or specific sectors. And so we do see the BPSOs as being a prime group to offer those opportunities too. So certainly as those come forward, we're happy to share them with you, and you can make a decision as to whether or not you wish to participate. Long-term care BPSOs are also eligible to become an organizational member of the Nursing Best Practice Research Center, which really provides opportunities for linking with researchers and others related to evidence-based practice and guideline implementation. And we have a growing group of organizations who are members of the NBPRC, and they really see opportunities there to learn from each other, where we have decision makers in clinical areas and also academic researchers who are looking for questions to answer. And so this has been a really nice partnership for many, many of our BPSOs. So I'm going to move on now to what RNAO commits to. I've spoken a lot about what's required in terms of the implementation, capacity development, evaluation requirements, et cetera. Now I'm going to move to what it is that RNAO is able to support you with through this process. So as I mentioned, we'll provide you with an orientation to the initiative. So those successful applicants will gather together and have an opportunity to meet each other and launch this next cohort of long-term care BPSOs. We'll provide consultation on guideline implementation and the uptake through the support of our long-term care BPSO coach, which is an RNAO staff member who is employed in our organization through the Long-Term Care Best Practices Program. And again, that program is funded through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, as Carol mentioned earlier. And this coach will be available to the long-term care BPSO about 1 day a week, which works out to 0.2 FTE to help support you with the work that you're doing. We'll also facilitate participation in a network of long-term care BPSO liaisons. And so as our group grows and we have opportunities for knowledge exchange amongst those who are leading this work in long-term care homes, we see a great opportunity for them to come together on a regular basis to develop relationships with each other, but also to share strategies, to share challenges, and learn together about this process. And overall, we found that methodology has been extremely successful with our BPSOs, and so that over time, there's some really strong relationships that are established in ways that people can connect with each other in the long term and ask for supports or bounce ideas off of each other. We will also host the annual BPSO Knowledge Exchange Symposium, which I mentioned earlier. So that would be funded by the RNAO through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care, and that would cover any travel expenses and overnight accommodation that might be required to be able to attend that event, and it generally is held in Toronto. We're also committing to providing support and access to the RNAO nursing order sets. And for those of you that don't know what order sets are, they're a group of evidence-based interventions that are specific to the domains of nursing, and they're really intended to standardize the care provided for a specific clinical condition. And so they're very, very specific to the guideline recommendations and are actually built through the guideline recommendations themselves. And so you'll start to see that there's the opportunity for you to select specific guidelines. There's opportunity for you to utilize nursing order sets, which are the interventions that the nurses and others are going to be using in the care of clients. And then those interventions through the order sets lead directly to the indicators in Enquire. And so you end up with a full package of resources to be able to move from that knowledge right through the implementation and evaluation of the work that you're doing. I've spoken about the participation in the network of long-term care liaisons, and generally speaking, we have a monthly meeting with this group, and this helps to really discuss opportunities and challenges and things of which sometimes we can learn a lot from each other, and really opportunities to update each other on the progress that's being made. I've talked about opportunities for research, but one of the things that we really find helpful for BPSO organizations is to participate in various aspects of guideline development, various implementation projects, and dissemination activities. And so often we'll turn to our BPSOs when we're looking for stakeholder reviewers for guidelines, expert panel members, particular implementation projects, and dissemination activities at conferences and events, or sharing your experiences with others at RNAO events. So that's a really big piece of all of this together that you might not have an opportunity to participate in otherwise. And I've already spoken about hosting an annual symposium and the final summit on a regular basis and funding that. Now, we do meet with our BPSO teams twice a year to review their reports. So then we submit reports on a regular basis to the RNAO twice a year, a mid-year report, and then a final report on each of those 3 years to really help us monitor progress and provide recommendations. And so we do meet with all members of the team here at RNAO that are involved in that work. That would be Carol and myself, the BPSO coach, and then whatever team members, obviously the BPSO liaison, but whatever other team members at the BPSO that would like to join us to have an opportunity to discuss their progress and how things are going. We will conduct a site visit at least once over the 3-year period at a time that's convenient for you to review, on-the-ground implementation, what's happening, how are things going, and monitoring and evaluation activities. and again, provide a LHIN-based RNAO coach to support the work over the 3-year designation period. And I've talked about NQuire already, but we'll obviously be able to support a consistent approach to data collection, which is important, and all the resources for collecting that data will be provided through NQuire. And we'll also be able to provide training and guidance and instruction on the use of those tools. And so we have a team here at RNAO that works exclusively on NQuire that would be available to you in addition to the long-term care BPSO coach. And again, certainly being able to provide you with those reports that will be so very helpful in monitoring your progress. So in terms of the funding that's provided through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care for this work, the Ministry of Health through RNAO is funding that 1 day a week of the long-term care BPSO coach's time. We'll be funding the staff attendance, travel, and accommodation as necessary at the long-term care BPSO orientation session. We'll be providing the support of registration, which includes accommodation and travel for an RN or an RPN each year to attend the RNAO Clinical Summer Institute, and again, to be able to support the attendance of staff members at the Knowledge Exchange annual meeting that is held generally in the springtime of each year. So that's certainly the financial contribution that RNAO will be making through the Ministry of Health and Long-Term Care. Now, the proposal evaluation, you'll note in the RFP, is quite detailed, and one of the things I just wanted to highlight for you as you're considering your proposal is that the scope of the work is critically important that you're able to describe it to us in some detail so that we understand, which guidelines you're implementing and where you're going to be implementing them. Organizational support is also very important. As I indicated earlier, we found that it's absolutely critical that there be support at all levels of the organization for this activity. And so as you're thinking about your proposal, you'll want to really highlight who do we need to get letters of support from, and we've provided some suggestions in the RFP document. Previous experience with guideline implementation is certainly important, but it's probably not as critical as some of the other areas. And so as you're thinking about that, think about how you've experienced implementation of practice changes, what work you've already done with maybe your required organizational programs, and how you've integrated guidelines into that work. We do want to hear about your team, and so we'll need to know who your BPSO liaison would be and what other knowledge and skill and experience you may be able to draw from within other members of the long-term care home staff who might be able to support you with this work. And then again, really focusing on what is it that you're going to be able to deliver on in terms of capacity within your organization to meet those deliverables and sustain the outcomes. And then, as I indicated earlier, there is a financial contribution that's expected in terms of being able to support this work on an ongoing basis. And there is a budget template in the RFP that can help direct you on some of the critical areas or key areas where there may be some costs incurred that you'll need to consider. So in terms of the review process, we do have and we'll be recruiting a long-term care BPSO review committee. And each proposal that we receive will be reviewed independently by about 4 to 5 reviewers. And the reason we use 4 to 5 reviewers is because we do actually want to ensure that each proposal is reviewed from a variety of perspectives. So we will have our staff, our BPSO team here at RNAO review every proposal we receive. We'll have some individuals from experienced BPSOs who have worked and led BPSO activities in their own organizations review proposals so that they have an opportunity to bring that perspective. And then we'll also have them reviewed from a perspective of evaluation and the monitoring capacity that is available within the organization. We have an established scoring tool that we use so that we use a consistent approach across all applications to ensure we're being consistent and transparent. So once the successful applicants are identified, our goal is selecting 1 per eligible LHIN, and again, that'll be dependent on the submission distribution. So currently we have 4 long-term care BPSOs representing 8 sites, and that's why we have a very specific call out right now to identify BPSOs in those LHINs for which we do not currently have a long-term care BPSO. and all applicants will be informed in writing of the status of their application by us after we've completed the review process. So important dates. The RFP has been released and was released several weeks ago and is available, as you are aware, on our website. The letter of intent is due October the 30th, and the purpose of the letter of intent is really to help us get a sense of how many organizations are interested. Is there some targeted marketing that we need to do? And it helps us prepare for the review process so we know approximately how many reviewers we're going to need, et cetera. I do want to emphasize that the letter of intent is not binding, and so if you have submitted a letter of intent and you think, I'm not sure that we're going to be ready to do this, there is the opportunity to withdraw. And we have received proposals from people in the past who have not submitted a letter of intent or submitted the letter past the date. So we are really wanting people to identify their interest at this point and really commit to an understanding of what this is all about. The RFP deadline will be December the 17th, as it's described in the RFP, and we'll be releasing the results to each of the sites probably February or March. There is some requirements, contracts to be signed, et cetera, before we get started. And so we anticipate that our long-term care BPSO launch will either be very late March or very early April 2015 in order to be ready for the 2015-2018 cohort. So I'm going to just stop there. Carol and I have shared a lot of information over the last 50 minutes. And I just would like to open the lines up and see if anybody has any specific questions they'd like to ask at this time.
Hello, Heather. It's Shelley calling in from Thunder Bay from St. Joseph's Care Group.
Oh, yes. Hi. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes. As you know, we are definitely interested, but we have a number of sites. We have 2 long-term care sites, and then we also have, I think we were considering the general application. Is it possible to apply for both?
That's a great question, and I haven't had anybody ask that yet before. I think what you'd need to think about is sort of the scope of the work that you wanted to do. And so if you're wanting to focus on the long-term care sites within your care group, I'd suggest that you start with this application.
Okay.
You think you might want to start with the other non-long-term care caregiving units or programs within St. Joseph's Care Group, you may want to consider the other application. I think it's unlikely that 2 of them together would be the strategy that I would recommend, because what you may want to think about is the opportunity for spread and dissemination through your designation period, starting at one area of focus and then spreading that to the remainder of the organization. If you feel that you want to do it across the whole organization, that you're ready, then I would suggest the general application and then being able to spread it into the long-term care. But you'll note that there's different requirements and different supports for the general application.
Okay, so we're better to apply for one.
I think so, yes. And I can give you an example. So for an example, Sunnybrook Health Sciences Center has long-term care beds at their organization, but they're in the general group, as does Baycrest.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. But again, I think you need to think about where do you want to start and where's the greatest need.
Okay.
Yeah. Any other questions? I'll wait a couple more minutes. What I would suggest is if you're sort of considering the application, we are always happy to answer questions. We are looking, as I said, that if you are interested in a specific aspect of the proposal and you need some more information, we would ask that you submit any of your questions in writing. And these can be submitted to Sitlali Singh, and her email address is in the RFP. We find that it's really important for us to give feedback on any questions in writing so that you are very clear on what it is that we're recommending. And so we would ask that the questions come to us in that manner. but we're certainly very happy to answer any questions, and we are recommending that they be to us by December the 10th, so that if there's anything critical that you need to think about, you've got a bit of time before the application is actually due to be able to respond to those issues. And so we're suggesting that December the 10th be the latest that those questions come to us. But I'm just going to ask again, are there any questions on the phone right now about what we've shared with you today? Okay, well, I think what I will say then is, just as we wrap up, is that there are always opportunities for us if you are considering this opportunity and you're wondering about if it's right for you. We have a large network of BPSOs who would be very happy to meet with you or talk with you about their experience. And so if that's something that would be of interest to you, please do contact us through CITLALI, and we'll determine who might be the most appropriate BPSO organization to put you in touch with to answer some of your more specific questions that you might want to discuss with somebody who's gone before you in this work. So I'll make that as an offer, and we'd be happy to see what we could do to contact you up with somebody who can answer some of those questions. So again, I'll just remind you of the important dates. We do hope that we'll hear from some of you by the October 30th date for the letter of intent, and we look forward to receiving your proposals by December 17th. And I'll just check with Carol to see if there's anything else you wanted to emphasize, Carol, before we say goodbye to the team.
No, other than saying thank you very much for joining us today. We appreciate your interest in the long-term care BPSO designation, and as Heather said, we're happy to answer any questions that you may have regarding the request for proposals and the process.
Great. Well, thanks so much, Carol, and thanks again to all of you for joining us today. And at this point, we'll stop the recording and say goodbye. Thanks so very much. Bye for now.
Bye, everyone.